What if Isaac Newton, the genius who unlocked the laws of the universe, became a detective instead? Late 17th century England was in chaos. Silver coins, the lifeblood of trade, were being shaved and clipped by cunning criminals, spreading economic ruin like a silent plague. Even with new machine-minted coins, old coins still circulated, and bold forgers thrived. Among them was William Chaloner, a master of deception who rose from a poor tailor's son to a criminal mastermind, manipulating both the underworld and politics to his advantage. But then, in 1696, Isaac Newton was appointed warden of the Royal Mint. Burned out from years of study, he now faced a new challenge: restoring order to England's currency and bringing the audacious Chaloner to justice. Newton didn't just enforce the law. He became a master strategist, infiltrating taverns, interrogating criminals, and applying scientific rigor to crime itself. Over years of cat-and-mouse pursuit, Chaloner's brilliance met Newton's relentless intellect, culminating in a dramatic trial that would decide the fate of England's most notorious counterfeiter. This is the story of genius versus guile, of crime and justice, and a lesser-known chapter in the life of one of history's greatest minds. Part 1: What would it look like if Isaac Newton, the man who unraveled the laws of gravity, took on the mantle of Sherlock Holmes? Not in fiction, but in truth. Picture a scientist, his mind sharpened by years of deciphering the movements of stars, suddenly thrown into the underworld of thieves and counterfeiters. This is no idle thought experiment. It is the story of Newton's battle against a criminal genius whose deceptions nearly wrecked the economy of England. To understand the war that was about to unfold, we must first step back into the England of the late 17th century, a nation whose coins, the very lifeblood of daily life, were in chaos. Silver was king, the most trusted medium of trade across Europe, and English silver coins were supposed to carry the confidence of the crown itself. Yet the currency had become sick, corroded by greed and by human hands. Before 1662, coins were still made in the ancient way. A blank disc of silver was placed between two engraved dies, and a hammer came crashing down. The result was a coin uneven in shape, with ragged edges and inconsistent weight. To most, this was simply how money looked. But for the criminally minded, it was opportunity. A quick scrape with a knife, a deft snip of the scissors, and a thin shaving of silver was removed. One coin lost almost nothing in appearance, yet a clever hand could repeat this trick hundreds, thousands of times. Those shavings could be melted, recast, or sold abroad, where silver fetched higher prices. Londoners knew the signs. In markets, in taverns, in the shadow of St. Paul's Cathedral, merchants weighed coins with suspicion. Fingers ran along the edges of shillings and crowns, searching for the telltale smoothness of clipping. A butcher at Smithfield Market might scowl at a customer, declaring the coin too light for the meat it was meant to buy. A tavern keeper could refuse a drink to a man whose money no longer rang true upon the counter. Even beggars learned to judge a coin's bite against their teeth. This was no petty nuisance. It was a plague spreading through England's veins. Clipped and counterfeit coins multiplied so quickly that honest trade faltered. Wages were worth less from one week to the next. Farmers in the countryside cursed the cities, where clipped coins circulated most freely. In London's alleys, rumors swirled of organized gangs, of melting pots hidden in backrooms, of fortunes built from stolen shavings of silver. The government had tried to respond. In 1662, they embraced the power of machines. Horse-driven presses at the Royal Mint produced coins perfectly round, each with milled edges, a delicate border of ridges and designs. These edges were meant as a safeguard, a clear warning that any tampering would be visible at once. It was a leap toward modernity, a promise that money might once again be trusted. And yet the problem did not vanish. The new coins were slow to spread, while the old hammered pieces remained in wide circulation. 30 years after the reform, less than 1 in 100 coins in circulation was machine-struck. The rest were battered survivors of an older system, still vulnerable, still tempting to the forger's hand. By the 1690s, England's economy staggered beneath the weight of its poison money. It was into this world of clipped silver and counterfeit schemes that Isaac Newton, the great mathematician and astronomer, would one day descend, not as a scientist, but as a hunter of criminals. The story begins with the coins themselves. Scarred, diminished, and mistrusted, passing from palm to palm like tainted blood. Part 2. In 1662, the Royal Mint unveiled a bold experiment in trust. For the first time in England's long history, coins would no longer be born under the hammer but under the steady bite of a machine. Driven by horses, the new presses struck shillings and crowns with a precision unknown to earlier generations. The edges of these milled coins carried delicate ridges, or even inscriptions, Latin phrases proclaiming the authority of the crown. No longer would a clipped coin escape unnoticed. Any tampering would scar the message that ran like a signature around its RIM.at first. This seemed a triumph. The coins gleamed, their surfaces smooth, their edges crisp and exact. To hold one was to hold a piece of modernity, as though the very march of science had passed into the palm of your hand. Yet the reform was not instantaneous. The new coins appeared slowly, a trickle into an ocean. The old hammered pieces, battered and irregular, still filled most purses and tills. And with them, the disease of clipping and counterfeiting endured. Everyday life in London revolved around this uncertainty. Shopkeepers became detectives of silver. A haberdasher on Cheapside might keep a small set of scales by the counter, weighing coins before accepting payment for ribbons or lace. Fishmongers in Billingsgate Market banged coins against their wooden stalls, listening for the dull thud that betrayed a lightened piece. In smoky taverns, coins passed from hand to hand, each one inspected under candlelight, tilted, and bitten before a flagon of ale could be trusted. Even children playing in the streets learned to spot the smoother rim of a clipped shilling. Suspicion seeped into every transaction. Neighbors quarreled over payments, servants were accused of dishonesty, and employers hesitated before handing out wages. The crown's image, stamped upon each coin, seemed a hollow promise. Money, the very instrument meant to bind society together, instead frayed the threads of trust. And all of this unfolded at a moment when England's position in the world was precarious. Across the Channel, France under Louis XIV brimmed with ambition, its armies vast, its coffers deep. To the north and east, the Dutch Republic commanded the seas, their merchant fleets carrying spices, textiles, and gold from every corner of the globe. England, though powerful, lived in their shadow, desperate to compete in trade, finance, and empire. But how could a nation thrive abroad when at home its money was doubted, its markets crippled by fraud? Coinage was more than silver. It was the blood of the realm. If the arteries were clogged with counterfeits, if trust dissolved in every marketplace, then England's ambitions could falter before they even left its shores. Reform had begun with the gleaming promise of milled edges and engraved inscriptions, yet the struggle was only sharpening. For the counterfeiters had not been defeated. They were merely adjusting, growing bolder, and preparing their next moves. It was into this fragile, suspicious world, part marketplace, part battlefield, that Isaac Newton would one day step, bringing with him the rigor of a scientist and the patience of a watchmaker. But first, the stage had to be set by those who sought to profit from chaos. Part 3. By the 1690s, England's battle against counterfeiters had reached a critical point. What had once been seen as petty theft, the clipping of coins, the forging of shillings, was now recognized as a threat to the very foundation of the state. In 1697, the government took the unprecedented step of declaring counterfeiting high treason. The law was stark and merciless. To tamper with the crown's coin was to challenge the authority of the king himself. The punishment was equally brutal: hanging, drawing, and quartering. Public executions, ghastly and theatrical, became both deterrent and spectacle. Crowds gathered in London squares to witness the fate of those caught in the act. Drums beat, trumpets blared, and officials read aloud the crimes of the condemned before the scaffold. As the victims struggled against their bonds, citizens murmured lessons of morality, whispered warnings of temptation, and, some less nobly, watched with morbid curiosity, entertained by the spectacle of human suffering. The horror of these punishments terrified ordinary forgers and petty thieves. Shopkeepers who once clipped coins in moments of need now hesitated, and apprentices dared not repeat the tricks they had learned from fathers and uncles. Fear of the gallows imposed a heavy discipline on even the smallest of offenses. Yet, while the common criminals cowered, England's master counterfeiters moved with confidence. They were cunning, well-connected, and utterly fearless. Their intelligence and ambition placed them in a different category altogether: men who could calculate risks with precision, manipulate allies in government, and exploit loopholes in the law. For them, the terror of execution was a background noise, to be measured but not feared. Among these daring figures, one man stood out: William Chaloner. Born in the rural heartlands, from a family of modest means, he was notorious from a young age for rebellion and cunning. School bored him, discipline enraged him, and the conventions of society simply did not apply. At 15, sent to Birmingham to learn a trade in nail-making, he found himself in the very city known as England's capital of counterfeit coin. It was there, amid the workshops and crowded alleys, that Chaloner absorbed the secrets of forgery. He learned not only the craft of coin-making but the art of deception, the subtle manipulations of trust, and the audacity required to operate above suspicion. Chaloner's talent was undeniable. By his early 20s, he had moved to London, assuming the guise of a legitimate tradesman, peddling watches and other luxury goods to the wealthy. Behind the polite manners and tailored coat, however, he was a man with a singular focus: the creation and circulation of false currency. Where others hesitated, constrained by fear, Chaloner moved boldly, experimenting with new techniques, forging partnerships with equally unscrupulous allies, and steadily expanding his influence in a city where every merchant eyed his coins warily. Chaloner thrived. He had learned the art of patience, the value of misdirection, and the thrill of operating at the edge of law and terror. The stage was set. The law had declared counterfeiting treason. The punishment was horrific, and yet Chaloner walked undeterred, a shadow in the heart of London's bustling economy, preparing to challenge even the crown itself. Part 4. William Chaloner's story began in the quiet countryside of Warwickshire, far from the bustling streets of London. Born into a poor family of tailors, he was the youngest son in a household of modest means. From an early age, Chaloner displayed a restlessness that confounded his parents, a refusal to follow lessons, a mischievous curiosity, and a mind always scheming. The slow rhythms of rural life felt like chains to him. He longed for a world that promised more than cloth and thread. by the time he turned 15. His parents, frustrated with his defiance, sent him to Birmingham. To most, it was an industrial town known for its nails, locks, and metalwork. But to Chaloner, Birmingham offered something far more valuable: opportunity. It was, as rumor had it, England's capital of counterfeiters. Here, in the shadow of hammering forges and smoking chimneys, he could observe the mechanics of metal, learn the secrets of coin-making, and study the tricks that men used to bend the law without breaking their lives. At least, temporarily, Birmingham was alive with sound and smoke. Forges roared day and night, sparks flying like fireflies into the darkened streets. In cramped workshops, apprentices struck metal with precision, while the air smelled of coal, sweat, and molten silver. Taverns overflowed with laborers and criminals alike, exchanging gossip and secrets over mugs of foaming ale. Whispers of successful forgeries, clever escapes from the law, and new tricks to skim silver circulated like currency itself. Chaloner drank it all in, absorbing knowledge as a man starving for power absorbs bread. He learned quickly. Metalwork, engraving, and the manipulation of coin edges became second nature. More importantly, he discovered the art of deception. Small scams, clever misdirections, and even the careful reading of human behavior became tools in his expanding arsenal. Every con he observed, every method he practiced, brought him closer to the ambition that burned within him. A life not bound by poverty, a life where he could rise above the limitations of his birth. Chaloner's ambitions were as restless as the streets of Birmingham themselves. While other apprentices were content to follow the rhythms of the forge, he imagined London, the city of opportunity, wealth, and anonymity. He saw the possibility of transforming knowledge into power, of turning skill into fortune. By the time he left Birmingham, Chaloner had in his mind a blueprint for a life far larger than the one into which he had been born. A life where audacity, cunning, and mastery over silver could place him at the heart of England's financial world. It was a dangerous dream, but for Chaloner, danger was part of the thrill. The die of his future had already been cast in the forges and smoky taverns of Birmingham. Every hammer strike, every whispered tale of a foiled scheme, and every clipped coin passed from hand to hand was a lesson in ambition, cunning, and the lengths a man would go to escape the obscurity of birth. Part 5. By the early 1680s, William Chaloner had left Birmingham behind, arriving in London with little more than ambition and a keen mind for deception. The city, sprawling and chaotic, was both a land of opportunity and a labyrinth of danger. Its narrow streets and crowded markets were teeming with merchants, beggars, soldiers, and opportunists. London was alive with noise. The clatter of carts over cobblestones, the shouting of hawkers in the marketplaces, and the low murmur of whispered deals in dark alleyways. Chaloner had no money, no trade, and no reputation. Yet what he lacked in resources he made up for in audacity. He began modestly, peddling luxury goods to the city's wealthy elite. Pocket watches with ornate hands, trinkets adorned with imitation jewels, and other fineries designed to impress. Each item was carefully crafted, or more accurately, carefully faked to appear authentic. In these early dealings, Chaloner tested his instincts, learning which marks could be swindled easily and which required subtlety, charm, and timing. It was not long before Chaloner sought partners who could complement his schemes. He joined forces with other ambitious fraudsters, men and women adept at reading human desire and fear. Together, they created elaborate scams, selling miracle cures to plague-stricken households. London, even decades after the Great Plague of 1665, was still haunted by the memory of disease. Families lived in fear of illness, and desperate people clutched at any promise of relief. Chaloner's team offered potions, powders, and charms, claiming miraculous results that often required an upfront payment far exceeding their value. Fortune-telling became another profitable venture. Chaloner and his associates would convince anxious young women that they could see the face of a future husband, or reveal hidden inheritances lying in secret. Using simple sleight of hand, storytelling, and the careful reading of human behavior, Chaloner wove a spell of trust. People believed him, even as he guided them toward parting with their coin. Through these ventures, Chaloner's cunning and charm began to shine. He understood people as instruments to be played, how to inspire hope, provoke fear, and manipulate desire. In taverns, he would listen to rumors, observe gestures, and quietly learn the secrets of the wealthy and the desperate alike. The city itself became his classroom, the dark corners of London both stage and laboratory for his evolving schemes. Amid the backdrop of plague-haunted alleys, crowded markets, and candle-lit rooms, Chaloner's reputation as a clever, audacious swindler grew. He was neither the first nor the last to exploit human weakness, but the breadth of his ambition set him apart. Every con refined his skills, every mark sharpened his instincts, and every success brought him closer to the larger dream. Control, influence, and ultimately, the power to manipulate the very currency of England itself. Part 6. By the early 1690s, William Chaloner had mastered the art of deception in London's marketplaces, but ordinary scams no longer satisfied him. He craved something larger, something that would elevate him beyond the modest thrills of trinkets and fortune-telling. It was during this time that he sought out Patrick Coffey, a master goldsmith renowned for his skill in metallurgy and precision work. Under Coffey's guidance, Chaloner learned the secrets of melting, molding, and engraving metals, not merely to craft jewelry, but to replicate the very coins that carried the crown's authority. With this newfound expertise, Chaloner began to assemble an operation unlike any seen before. He recruited skilled engravers and metalworkers, men who could carve the fine details necessary to mimic official dyes. The workshop, hidden behind unmarked doors and shuttered windows, hummed with clandestine activity. Molten silver hissed in cauldrons, presses pounded with rhythmic precision, and the air was thick with the scent of heated metal and oil. Paranoia was constant. Every visitor, every servant, and even the neighbors were potential threats. Guards and lookouts were stationed to warn of prying eyes, while Chaloner himself moved among the workers with a blend of charm and menace, ensuring loyalty through a mixture of fear and incentives. The output of this secretive empire was staggering. High-value coins became his focus. French pistoles, guineas, and other foreign currency that commanded immense purchasing power. One pistole could represent nearly a month's wages for an average laborer. Chaloner's coins were nearly flawless, indistinguishable from the originals except to the most trained eyes. Each minting was a triumph of craft, precision, and deceit. Yet as Chaloner's wealth grew, so did his ambition and arrogance. He moved into a house in the suburbs, purchased a private carriage, and surrounded himself with mistresses and allies who reinforced his growing sense of invincibility. Despite the danger of his enterprise, Chaloner took a curious pleasure in the artistry of his work. He would examine the coins he produced with a near-sentimental fondness, feeling almost sorrowful when they entered circulation and were spent or melted down. To him, each coin was a miniature masterpiece, a testament to his skill and audacity. Chaloner had become more than a swindler. He was a craftsman of crime, a man who merged artistry with lawlessness. His reputation as a master counterfeiter spread quietly among those who mattered merchants, bankers, and other criminals alike. And while the law declared such acts treason, Chaloner seemed indifferent, confident that his intelligence, charm, and meticulous planning would allow him to evade capture. In the shadows of London streets and the hidden chambers of his workshop, the stage was set for a confrontation with forces far greater than himself. A confrontation that would eventually bring him face to face with one of history's greatest minds. Part 7. By 1692, William Chaloner's audacity had brought him wealth, influence, and notoriety, but with it came peril. One of his closest associates was arrested, leaving Chaloner acutely aware of the fragility of his empire. Fear gripped him like a vice. For 2 tense days, he poured his energy into producing more coins, desperate to secure a safety net should the authorities move against him. Then, calculating the danger, he vanished into the outskirts of London, adopting a cautious anonymity to escape immediate capture. Yet Chaloner's ambition was insatiable. The suburbs and alleys could not contain his vision for power. Within months, he returned to the city, this time under the guise of a legitimate tradesman, selling old clothes and other modest goods. But Chaloner had learned that survival was not merely about hiding, it was about manipulation. And soon, a new opportunity presented itself: the Jacobite cause. The political climate of the 1690s was fraught with tension. King James II, recently deposed in the Glorious Revolution, lived in exile in France. His supporters, the Jacobites, plotted in whispers across London and Scotland, hoping for a return to the throne. Pamphlets, secret messages, and clandestine meetings marked the city as a hotbed of intrigue. Fear of rebellion simmered among officials, while opportunists sought to profit from the unrest. Chaloner, ever perceptive, saw a chance to turn politics to his advantage. He approached a group of Jacobite pamphleteers, ostensibly to assist their cause, only to betray them to the government at the right moment. By providing the authorities with evidence of their clandestine activities, he not only secured a handsome reward but also positioned himself as a man of usefulness to those in power. This was typical of Chaloner's strategy, manipulating both sides, balancing between criminal enterprise and political expediency, always calculating which angle offered the greatest benefit with the least risk. Even in these high-stakes maneuvers, Chaloner's cunning was apparent. While he delighted in his secret defiance of law and authority, he understood the art of appearance. To the government, he appeared cooperative, even patriotic. To the underworld, he remained a shadowy figure whose ambitions were matched only by his ingenuity. In a city divided by fear, politics, and allegiance, Chaloner thrived, exploiting the anxieties of others while meticulously safeguarding his own fortune. By blending crime and politics, Chaloner had elevated his game. He was no longer merely a forger of coins. He had become a manipulator of systems, a man capable of navigating the treacherous intersections of law, loyalty, and treason. But with every calculated move, he drew closer to forces far larger than himself. Forces embodied in the man who would soon challenge him, Isaac Newton. Part 8. By the mid-1690s, England's financial system teetered on the brink of disaster. Years of clipped silver, counterfeiting, and inconsistent coinage had left the economy fragile. Trade suffered, merchants despaired, and Parliament found itself grappling with a crisis that threatened both commerce and public trust. Silver coins, the backbone of everyday transactions, were increasingly unreliable. The streets echoed with stories of merchants rejecting worn or suspicious currency, and shopkeepers tested each coin with scales and sharp eyes, hoping to detect the slightest imperfection. Into this chaos stepped William Chaloner, ever opportunistic. Sensing both vulnerability and the potential for personal gain, he transformed himself from criminal into expert reformer. Chaloner began to publish pamphlets that criticized the royal mint, painting its operations as incompetent and its officials as negligent. His writings were precise and persuasive, exploiting Parliament's frustration with mounting economic instability. The language was measured, almost scholarly, giving him an air of legitimacy that few could challenge. Yet behind it lurked his familiar cunning, a man shaping perception while pursuing his own interests. Parliament, anxious to restore confidence in the currency, found Chaloner's critiques tantalizing. The mint, long considered a bureaucratic relic, now appeared hopelessly outdated. The king's officials, pressured by merchants and the public alike, debated reforms, unaware that one of the sharpest minds behind the pamphlets was a master counterfeiter, subtly probing for weaknesses. Chaloner's true aim was audacious. He sought to infiltrate the royal mint itself, placing himself close enough to manipulate coin production from the inside. The tension was palpable. Chaloner's letters and publications stirred both hope and unease, drawing the attention of officials and criminals alike. London's streets whispered of the coin expert, who seemed to know every flaw in the system, yet no one could fully grasp his true intentions. While Chaloner maneuvered in the shadows, plotting access to the very heart of England's coinage, another figure, equally brilliant, far more disciplined, was about to enter the stage. Isaac Newton, celebrated for his revolutionary discoveries in physics and mathematics, was soon to confront the chaos that Chaloner had helped magnify. The scene was set for a clash of titans, one driven by intellect and moral purpose, the other by ambition and cunning. The nation's coinage, already fragile, would become the battlefield. And in the midst of economic turmoil, the audience senses the coming storm. The legendary Newton preparing to step from the world of theory into a very different kind of practical challenge, where science, law, and justice would collide. Part 9. In April of 1696, the quiet world of Cambridge's lecture halls gave way to the shadowed halls of the Tower of London. Isaac Newton, a man whose name was already whispered with awe in scientific circles, received an appointment that would forever intertwine his legacy with England's currency, Warden of the Royal Mint. The recommendation came from Charles Montague, a former student turned influential Chancellor of the Exchequer, who recognized Newton's brilliance not only in mathematics and physics but in his capacity for precise, systematic thinking. Yet Newton did not arrive at this new role unscathed by years of intellectual toil. His decades at Cambridge had exacted a toll. Endless nights spent probing the mysteries of light, motion, and celestial mechanics had left him sleep-deprived, prone to paranoia, and frequently gripped by bouts of depression. Simple interactions could ignite his temper. Minor disputes often festered into prolonged, obsessive conflicts. Friends and colleagues noted a man alternately inspired and fragile, capable of extraordinary insight yet easily unsettled by perceived slights. The Tower of London Mint, where Newton took his post, was a place of both history and decay. Massive stone walls enclosed dimly lit workrooms, the air thick with the tang of molten metal and soot. Pounding hammers echoed against masonry, mingling with the constant hiss of molten silver poured into cauldrons. It was a place where chaos and order coexisted, the machinery antiquated, the staff accustomed to years of inefficient routine. To an ordinary observer, the mint might have seemed a labyrinth of bureaucracy, but to Newton it was a machine waiting to be recalibrated. Almost immediately, Newton embarked on a recoinage program of unprecedented scale. He organized a workforce of 500 men, overseeing every detail with meticulous precision. He recorded fuel consumption, measured the endurance of workers and horses, and monitored the capacity of every furnace and press. From early morning until past midnight, 6 days a week, he drove the operation forward with relentless intensity. Under his supervision, production soared. Previously, the mint could barely manage 15,000 coins per week, but Newton's reforms pushed output beyond 50,000. Between 1696 and 1699, the mint produced over £5 million worth of silver coins, almost double the total minted over the previous 35 years. His innovations did not merely restore the currency, they transformed the very nature of coin production. Newton's analytical mind turned the mint into a model of efficiency, applying principles of observation, measurement, and optimization with the same rigor he had used to uncover the laws of motion. Even the workers, accustomed to routine and tedium, found themselves swept along by his drive. The Tower of London became a crucible, where intellect and industry fused to meet a crisis that threatened the nation. And yet, amidst this extraordinary achievement, a new challenge awaited. The relentless cunning of William Chaloner, the master forger whose ambitions now collided with Newton's discipline. The stage was set for a struggle not merely over coins, but over justice, intellect, and the very integrity of England's economy. Part 10. Though Isaac Newton's appointment to the Royal Mint placed him at the heart of England's financial restoration, he initially approached one aspect of the role with visible reluctance: hunting counterfeiters. His passion lay in uncovering the secrets of the natural world, not chasing criminals through the alleys and taverns of London. Yet the law was explicit. Part of his duty as warden required him to suppress and prosecute those who threatened the currency. Newton quickly adapted, channeling his relentless analytical mind into this unexpected battlefield. Disguises became his tools. At dusk, he could be spotted among the taverns along the Thames, cloaked in common garb, blending seamlessly into the smoke-filled rooms where criminals traded secrets over mugs of ale. The stench of unwashed bodies, spilled liquor, and burning peat was a far cry from the austere libraries and lecture halls of Cambridge, but Newton endured it, observing every nuance. A nervous glance, a hesitant handshake, a whispered word. Each gesture became data, each encounter a hypothesis to be tested. In Newgate Prison, a place crawling with vermin and disease, Newton's presence startled inmates. Here, he interrogated suspects with methodical precision. He would pose questions, note inconsistencies, and cross-reference statements with reports from informants scattered across the city. His approach mirrored the scientific method: observe, hypothesize, experiment, and conclude. No detail was too small. The alignment of a coin's edge, the weight of a flan, the minutiae of a workshop rumor. All were pieces of a puzzle that Newton assembled with a meticulous hand. Over 18 months, Newton orchestrated more than 100 interviews, surveillance operations, and confrontations with witnesses, informants, and suspects. His network expanded. Undercover agents and informants embedded in taverns, workshops, and street markets supplied continuous streams of intelligence. No deception, however subtle, escaped his attention. While he might have started this work reluctantly, Newton approached it with the same disciplined intensity that had led him to decode the cosmos, transforming the pursuit of criminals into a careful exercise in logic and observation. And at the center of his investigations loomed a figure of particular interest: William Chaloner, the master counterfeiter whose ingenuity and audacity made him both dangerous and fascinating. The clash between Newton's analytical rigor and Chaloner's cunning would come to define this chapter of England's history. A battle where intellect, patience, and moral purpose collided with audacity, deception, and ambition. Part 11. In early 1697, William Chaloner made a bold, audacious move that brought him from the shadows of London's underworld into the spotlight of Parliament. armed with carefully crafted evidence. A single counterfeit coin he produced himself. He presented himself as an expert on coinage reform, claiming to have uncovered systemic corruption within the royal mint. His pamphlets and letters now found their ultimate stage. The committee rooms of the House of Commons, where officials and merchants alike gathered in anxious anticipation, desperate for solutions to the ongoing economic crisis. Chaloner's arguments were persuasive. With a confident tone and meticulous demonstrations, he highlighted flaws in the mint's processes, criticized officials for negligence, and proposed a series of innovative reforms. He spoke as a savior of the currency, a man whose experience and insight could restore stability to the nation's coinage. In the tense atmosphere of the committee rooms, every gesture, every carefully timed pause, heightened the drama. Members of Parliament leaned forward, some skeptical, some enthralled, as Chaloner painted a vision of a better, more reliable currency. His ultimate goal, however, was not reform but infiltration. Newton, present behind the scenes through his agents and loyal allies, immediately recognized the danger. The stories he had collected months earlier, from informants, underworld contacts, and the testimony of Peter Cook, a condemned conspirator, surfaced in his mind. Chaloner was not the well-meaning reformer he claimed to be. He was the master forger whose schemes had long threatened the integrity of England's currency. Every detail of Chaloner's presentation was a calculated act of manipulation, a performance designed to exploit Parliament's desperation. The tension between the two men was invisible yet palpable. Chaloner's brilliance lay in his ability to twist perception, to make the corruptible appear righteous and the guilty appear virtuous. Newton, by contrast, relied on observation, reason, and the meticulous assembly of facts. The stage was set for a subtle, intellectual confrontation. While Chaloner dazzled officials with charisma and cunning, Newton prepared his countermeasures, knowing that the battle over England's coinage would not be won in committee rooms alone, but through patient strategy, careful evidence gathering, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. This encounter marked the first significant clash between mind and mischief, between a scientist devoted to order and a forger devoted to chaos. Chaloner's manipulative brilliance was on full display, but the silent presence of Newton promised that every deception would soon be tested against the cold, relentless light of reason. Part 12. As 1697 progressed, Isaac Newton transformed from reluctant administrator to relentless investigator. He intensified his surveillance, embedding informants in every corner of London's bustling streets, from smoky taverns to crowded marketplaces, from the dingy workshops where counterfeit coins were crafted to the inns where criminals whispered in code. Every detail mattered: the shape of a coin, the brand of a press, the smallest slip of the tongue. Newton's approach was systematic, almost scientific. Observation, hypothesis, testing, and confirmation became the framework through which he unraveled Chaloner's schemes. Chaloner, never one to cede ground easily, struck back with cunning defiance. He publicly accused Newton of corruption, claiming the warden was complicit in the very crimes he had been tasked to stop. Rumors swirled through London's alleyways and coffee houses, each whisper amplified by gossip-mongers eager to sensationalize the drama. Merchants debated loyalties, prisoners speculated on the outcome, and newspapers carried tantalizing hints of scandal. For a man accustomed to the certainties of mathematics and physics, Newton now faced the unpredictable chaos of human intrigue, a different kind of puzzle, fraught with danger and deception. Despite Newton's meticulous evidence gathering, the first attempt to bring Chaloner to justice ended in frustration. Legal technicalities, missing testimony, and Chaloner's own manipulation of witnesses allowed him to walk free. His mocking smile a bitter reminder of the difficulties of confronting a criminal mind as agile as his own. Yet this setback did not deter Newton. If anything, it strengthened his resolve. He redoubled efforts, coordinating his informants, refining his interrogations, and secretly tracking Chaloner's every move. London had become a chessboard, and Newton was determined to anticipate every move of a foe whose cleverness was matched only by his audacity. The city itself seemed to pulse with tension, its foggy streets hiding whispers of conspiracy and betrayal. Every tavern and back alley held a potential lead, every coin a clue. Newton's mind, sharpened by years of scientific rigor, now applied that same discipline to crime. The stage was set for the decisive confrontation. The game was no longer abstract. The fate of England's currency and the triumph of order over deception hung in the balance. Part 13. By 1698, William Chaloner had shifted his focus from coins to a new, audacious scheme: forging lottery bonds. The English government, eager to fund public works and debts, relied on a lottery system that promised both profit and prestige to its participants. Chaloner saw opportunity. He crafted counterfeit tickets with meticulous attention to detail, imitating the official designs so convincingly that even experienced clerks could be deceived. The city buzzed with excitement as rumors of his new venture spread, but this time, his ambition carried a hidden risk. Chaloner's fatal mistake was subtle but decisive. He unwittingly involved a government informant among his collaborators. The man, reporting every move to Newton's network of spies, provided the evidence needed to trigger Chaloner's arrest. The warden of the mint acted with characteristic precision, orchestrating the operation to seize the forger without alerting him prematurely. London's underworld, usually a sanctuary of rumor and secrecy, had been penetrated by Newton's careful, patient strategy. Yet even as Chaloner was taken into custody, frustration gnawed at Newton. Key pieces of evidence, crucial plates and forged tickets, mysteriously vanished. Legal loopholes and the limits of authority meant that, once again, Chaloner escaped a conviction. The city murmured at his apparent invincibility, while Newton endured sleepless nights, poring over reports, witness statements, and interrogations. Every failed prosecution weighed heavily, testing his patience and resolve. Chaloner, emboldened by his repeated escapes, grew increasingly overconfident. He flaunted wealth, entertained mistresses, and boldly returned to schemes that skirted the edges of the law. But this arrogance, while exhilarating to him, planted the seeds of his downfall. By underestimating the persistence, intelligence, and meticulous planning of Isaac Newton, Chaloner set the stage for a final confrontation that would bring the long-running battle between forger and scientist to a dramatic, inescapable conclusion. Part 14. By early 1699, Isaac Newton had orchestrated a methodical and relentless plan to finally ensnare William Chaloner. Every move was calculated, every informant and witness positioned with precision. Over months, Newton gathered 44 separate testimonies, each one carefully cross-checked and corroborated. Agents infiltrated prisons where Chaloner's former collaborators were held, observed the taverns where whispers of plots circulated, and monitored the workshops where illicit coins and forged papers were once produced. No detail was too small, no rumor dismissed. The turning point came with the reappearance of Thomas Holloway, a former accomplice of Chaloner who had fled to Scotland after a previous investigation. Newton, anticipating the value of Holloway's testimony, orchestrated his discreet return to London. Holloway, aware of the warden's meticulous intelligence network, recognized that cooperation offered the only path to leniency. Under careful supervision, he provided a full account of Chaloner's operations, the techniques of forgery, and the network of agents who had aided him. His words became the linchpin of Newton's legal strategy. Through patient correspondence, surveillance, and precise timing, Newton ensured that every loose end was tied. Letters were dispatched, witnesses were prepared, and evidence was secured in a manner that left little room for Chaloner to exploit procedural loopholes. The warden's strategy was not only to prosecute but to construct an airtight narrative, one that even the most cunning forger could not unravel. When Chaloner was arrested once more, the stakes had never been higher. He now faced a warden who had studied every facet of his criminal mind, anticipated every possible ruse, and marshaled a web of testimony and evidence that left no escape. London's courts would become the stage for the climactic confrontation between audacious criminality and relentless intellect, a struggle that would test the limits of cunning, patience, and justice itself. Part 15: The long struggle between genius and deceit reached its climax in the spring of 1699. William Chaloner, confident in his cunning, took the witness stand with all the bravado of a man accustomed to evading justice. He lashed out, hurling accusations, feigning madness, and attempting every trick he had perfected over years of criminal enterprise. Yet each gesture, each false claim, only highlighted the meticulous preparations of his relentless adversary Isaac Newton. Armed with the 44 witness testimonies, detailed reports from informants, and tangible evidence of forgery, presented a case that left no room for ambiguity. The courtroom, tense and silent, absorbed the weight of every fact. Every sequence of Chaloner's manipulations laid bare. The jury, confronted with the overwhelming clarity of Newton's methodical exposition, deliberated briefly before returning a swift verdict. Guilty. On a cold March morning, Chaloner was led to Tyburn, the notorious site of public executions. The streets of London were lined with spectators, some curious, some morbidly enthralled, all bearing witness to the ultimate consequence of audacious crime. Chaloner's final moments were a blend of defiance, despair, and bitter reflection. He penned letters to Newton and others, alternating between threats, excuses, and a reluctant acknowledgement of his own miscalculations. For Newton, the scene was both a legal triumph and a somber meditation on human potential misapplied. In his journal, he would later note that talent, when divorced from moral purpose, could become a destructive force, brilliant, yet tragically wasted. Chaloner's death closed a chapter of London's criminal history, but it also illuminated the broader impact of Newton's intellect beyond the sciences. Through persistence, strategy, and rigorous application of reason, he had restored the integrity of the royal mint, safeguarded the nation's currency, and demonstrated that the mind, when dedicated to justice, could prevail even against the most cunning adversaries. The tale of Chaloner and Newton became a testament to the collision of brilliance and villainy, a story where ingenuity, patience, and moral resolve triumphed over audacity, greed, and deception. Part 16: After the tumultuous years of investigation, prosecution, and reform, Isaac Newton's life entered a period of enduring influence and recognition. In 1705, Queen Anne conferred upon him the honor of knighthood, acknowledging not only his groundbreaking contributions to science, but also his pivotal role in stabilizing England's financial system. As master of the Royal Mint, Newton continued to oversee the production and integrity of the nation's currency until his death in 1727. Ensuring that the meticulous reforms he had implemented endured for generations. Newton's work at the Mint extended beyond administration. It represented the application of analytical rigor, moral principle, and disciplined observation to the complex and often corrupt human world. Where Chaloner had wielded his brilliance for deception, Newton employed his intellect for order and justice. This lesser-known chapter of his life reminds us that genius is not defined solely by discoveries in mathematics or physics, but also by the courage and diligence to confront chaos, fraud, and immorality. William Chaloner, by contrast, survived in memory only as a cautionary tale, a figure whose audacity and cunning were ultimately squandered by arrogance and short-sightedness. His story underscores the timeless tension between talent and ethics, ambition and responsibility, a reminder that brilliance misapplied can lead only to ruin. Even centuries later, Newton's impact at the Mint is commemorated. In 2017, to mark the 375th anniversary of his birth, the Royal Mint issued a special 50-pence coin honoring his dual legacy. The scientist who unlocked the laws of the universe and the meticulous warden who brought order to England's currency. It is a fitting tribute to a life where intellect met justice, and where the subtle interplay of human cunning and rigorous reasoning shaped the course of history. That is where our story comes to an end for tonight. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to join me again for more bedtime tales, please like and subscribe. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next story.